ABC General Hospital Spoilers reveal that Steve Burton had weathered storms before contract negotiations. Cast changes. The rewrites that came at the last possible second, but nothing prepared him for the avalanche of tension that swallowed General Hospital in the weeks leading up to his departure. The official statement about taking time off for family sounded peaceful, even hopeful. But behind the calm announcement was a truth twisted by pressure, conflict, and an internal unraveling so profound that even a veteran like Steve could no longer stand in the middle of it without feeling himself break apart. What the public didn't see was how the air on set had begun to change. The studio, once buzzing with collaboration and trust, now carried a heaviness that clung to every corner. Whispers between producers cut like static, meetings grew sharper, and decisions that should have been unanimous became battlegrounds. For a show built on decades of legacy and emotional investment, this underlying fracture felt like a blade pressed quietly against its own spine. And Steve, the face of Jason Morgan, the anchor of countless storylines, suddenly found himself trapped in the crossfire of leadership disagreements that, we had nothing to do with him yet, affected him more deeply than anyone realized. The first real shock came when a group of executive producers unveiled a dramatic restructuring plan meant to modernize GH. The word sounded sleek, innovative, forward-thinking, but the proposals underneath were chaotic, contradictory, and brutally dismissive of the show's emotional foundation. The visionaries clashed with the traditionalists. Writers fought against sudden mandates that overturned months of planning. Storylines were ripped apart and stitched back together in ways that defied logic. And in the center of that storm stood Jason Morgan, or rather the man who portrayed him. Steve noticed the shift the moment he sat down for a creative meeting, and found himself surrounded not by colleagues, but by divided factions. One group insisted Jason needed a complete reinvention, softer, more fallible, more publicly vulnerable. Another group wanted the opposite, darker, morally gray, a vigilante edging dangerously close to villainy. A third group wanted to reduce Jason's screen time entirely to open space for a new generation. Each side presented him with papers, outlines, character arcs that contradicted the others. Each side asked him, sometimes politely, sometimes with the sharpness of desperation, to commit to the direction they believed would save the show. But GH had always thrived because of unity, and now unity was the one thing missing. What no one understood was that Steve wasn't afraid of change, he was afraid of senseless change. He was afraid of watching a show he had loved for decades tear itself apart from the inside, using its own characters as weapons. And the more this internal divide grew, the more the weight of it pressed down on his shoulders, as if the character he embodied was being pulled limb by unseen hands in opposite directions. Then came the meeting that broke him. A closed-door session, supposedly routine, where he found himself being told simultaneously that Jason needed to be rewritten from the ground up and that his loyalty to the original interpretation was becoming a creative obstacle. The words didn't wound him because they criticized him. They wounded him because they revealed how fractured the leadership had become. No one was speaking the same language. No one agreed on what GH should be anymore. And somehow, all that fragmentation kept pointing back to his character as the symbol of everything that needed to change. The shock didn't come from feeling unwanted. Steve knew his value. It came from realizing the environment he had once cherished was collapsing under conflicting ambitions. Actors whispered about instability. Crew members tiptoed around production offices, afraid to overhear yet another tense discussion. Writers stayed late into the night, deleting entire scripts because new orders arrived at midnight demanding urgent revisions. The heart of General Hospital was starting to beat off rhythm, and Steve, who had spent a lifetime in its pulse, felt the tremor deep in his bones. When he finally decided to step back, it wasn't because he needed rest. It was because the show needed distance, needed time, needed clarity, but his departure, meant to be a pressure valve, instead ignited a wildfire. Fans mourned, speculated, accused. Media outlets exaggerated every word from his announcement. Some claimed he was forced out. Others insisted he was furious. Others whispered about illness, scandal, betrayal. But the truth was far more tragic. Steve left because the place that once felt like home no longer felt safe, steady, or whole. He left because staying meant participating in a creative tug-of-war that drained him, that chipped away at his love for the craft, that threatened to destroy the Jason Morgan legacy in a storm of disjointed visions. And the aftermath, a disaster no one predicted. Storylines were thrown into crisis mode. Casting schedules had to be rewritten. Directors scrambled to salvage arcs now missing their centerpiece. Executive producers pointed fingers at one another behind closed doors. ABC demanded explanations. GH fan forums erupted with outrage and fear. The absence of one man revealed the truth no one wanted to confront. GH had been running on borrowed stability for far too long. Steve Burton's departure wasn't just a personal decision, it was the symptom of a deeper fracture. And unless those fractures are healed, unless the chaos behind the cameras is resolved, The storm that pushed Steve away may be only the beginning of a much larger collapse waiting to strike Port Charles, both the fictional world and the real one behind it. Michelle Lundstrom had never intended to become the silent catalyst of a crisis. Yet the moment her pregnancy entered Steve Burton's world, everything in his career and everything behind the scenes at General Hospital began to shake in ways no one could fully control. What should have been a moment of joy slowly grew into a pressure point that exposed every fracture, every unresolved tension, every buried conflict within the GH production team. As Michelle's pregnancy advanced, Steve felt time slipping through his fingers. He watched her body change, watched her prepare for motherhood, watched her navigate the anxieties of doctor visits and sleepless nights, all while he remained shackled to a production schedule that demanded more each month. GH wanted Jason Morgan front and center in a sweeping new storyline. But Steve could see that these demands collided directly with the timeline of Michelle's pregnancy, creating a conflict he could no longer ignore. The show expected relentless devotion. Michelle needed presence, safety, partnership, and Steve stood between two worlds that refused to bend. Meanwhile, backstage at GH, a different storm was already brewing. Writers clashed over new story directions. Executive producers argued over ratings, character reinventions, and whether the show needed to shift its identity to appeal to a younger audience. Tension hung so thick in the production offices that even longtime staff whispered in hallways rather than speaking openly. And in the center of this chaotic power struggle stood Steve, whose role had unwittingly become symbolic, a battleground for creative control. Some producers wanted Jason Morgan reimagined entirely. Others insisted he remain the stoic anchor fans adored. But the disagreements grew louder, sharper, more personal. Steve felt himself pulled between contradictory visions, each side expecting his loyalty. Every meeting left him more conflicted, more suffocated. Then Michelle's pregnancy reached a critical stage, and suddenly the conflict sharpened into a single, devastating realization: the show would not slow down for him, and life at home could no longer wait. Michelle needed him. Their unborn child needed him. And Steve could no longer pretend he could split himself in half to satisfy both worlds. For the first time in decades, General Hospital was not simply a workplace, it was a force demanding a sacrifice he was no longer willing to make. When he announced his temporary departure, the public saw a gentle message about family rest and gratitude, but privately the truth carried far more weight. He was stepping away because the show had become unstable, creatively fractured, and emotionally draining at the exact moment his personal life required stability. Michelle's pregnancy didn't push him out maliciously. It illuminated how deeply broken the system around him had become. Yet her influence, quiet, human, undeniable, triggered a collapse none of the producers had anticipated. Without Steve, storylines unraveled. Production meetings became crisis control sessions. Executives panicked about fan backlash. Writers scrambled to rewrite episodes. And the fear lurking beneath all of it finally surfaced: if Steve Burton could walk away, even temporarily, what else might fall apart next? Michelle unknowingly revealed the truth GH had been avoiding: that no actor, no matter how iconic, could survive the chaos behind the curtain forever. Her pregnancy became the symbol of a shift no one could stop. For Steve, she was a reason to finally choose life over legacy. For GH, she was the reminder that even a long-running institution could face a future shaped by forces it didn't see coming. And as her due date approached, the question haunting the entire production became impossible to ignore: if Steve did not return, or if the tension behind the scenes continued to escalate. Would General Hospital ever recover, or had the first cracks already begun to spread into something much larger, much darker, and far more permanent? Steve Burton's confidence in his return to General Hospital in 2026 has detonated like a spark in a room already soaked with gasoline. For months, whispers, rumors, and speculation swirled around his absence, from personal upheaval to backstage chaos. But his certainty, the calm assurance in his voice when he said he would be back, has turned everything upside down. It isn't just news, it's a shockwave. His declaration cuts through the doubts and ignites a frenzy of emotion across the fan base, the production team, and even the cast, who have been quietly holding their breath. Suddenly the story shifts. Suddenly the questions multiply. And suddenly the energy around GH feels volatile, electrifying, and dangerously unpredictable. Steve's return signals more than a homecoming. It signals a collision between the old world that existed before he stepped away and the new one that formed in his absence, a world shaped by shifting alliances, backstage disagreements, and creative risks that were never meant to be tested without him. The moment he confirmed he was coming back, everything the show had been building began to tremble. Writers who had mapped out long-term arcs felt the ground tilt beneath their feet. Producers who once stood firm in their new direction now found themselves revisiting old assumptions, reevaluating choices, and questioning whether the show could survive without restoring some piece of what Steve brought to the screen. His return is not just a casting update. It is a reordering of the entire GH universe. What makes the situation explosive is not the return itself, but the timing. 2026 is shaping up to be a year of massive shifts for GH, rising competition in daytime television. Internal restructuring, ambitious new arcs designed to launch the show into a fresh era. And now Steve Burton's comeback cuts through all of it like a blade, forcing GH into a position where it must either integrate him with brilliance or crumble under the weight of clashing vision. The pressure is so intense it feels almost cinematic. The stakes are higher than ever. Every department is scrambling how to adjust storylines, how to balance legacy characters with new blood, how to please fans without sacrificing momentum. His presence alone changes everything. And beneath the surface, something even more unhinged is taking shape. The very chaos that once pushed Steve away now threatens to ignite all over again, but this time, amplified by anticipation, fear, excitement, and unresolved tension. His confidence acts as a mirror, exposing fractures still lingering behind the scenes. Some see his return as salvation, others as disruption. But everyone feels the shift. It is impossible not to. When an actor of his weight, history, and emotional impact re-enters the ecosystem, the entire structure must adapt or risk collapse. This is where the crazy new storyline truly begins, not on screen, but in the living heartbeat of the show's future. Steve's comeback forces GH to confront the decisions made during his absence. Will arcs be rewritten? Will characters be repositioned? Will long-buried conflicts be reignited? No one knows. And the uncertainty only amplifies the madness. The atmosphere surrounding GH is no longer merely dramatic. It is volatile. The promise of 2026 has become a pressure cooker, and every day that passes brings the temperature a little higher. The truth is simple and terrifyingly powerful. Steve Burton's return is not just an event. It is a catalyst. And catalysts don't restore balance, they create explosions. As 2026 unfolds, GH stands on the brink of one of its most unpredictable eras yet. The excitement is overwhelming. The tension is suffocating. And the changes rolling in are not merely adjustments. They are seismic shifts, the kind that reshape storylines, careers, and the legacy of the entire franchise. This is not just a comeback. This is the beginning of the wildest transformation GH has seen in years, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will remain the same.